Continuing coverage as the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, has resigned. A replacement is at the ready. The ramifications are many. Reporting begins now from Capitol Hill, Justice, the White House, and beyond. First, to the man who broke the story, John Roberts, live on the North Lawn. John.
And only, Shep, by virtue of our terrific producer over at the Department of Justice, Jake Gibson, who phoned me up, said he had information. We got it confirmed from sources here at the White House. So we do know that the president this morning asked for the resignation of Jeff Sessions. This was before he went into that sometimes crazy press conference that was scheduled for 11:30 this morning. He knew that there was going to be a resignation letter that was coming over from Jeff Sessions at the Department of Justice at any moment. We have confirmed with sources that Matt Whitaker, and the president has actually tweeted about this, so that's confirmation at the highest source now, that Matt Whitaker, who is the chief of staff to Jeff Sessions, a former U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Iowa. He ran in the Republican primaries in 2014 for the Senate in Iowa, will now become the acting attorney general. Jake Gibson also reports that as acting attorney general, the Russia investigation would now fall under his purview. However, it doesn't look like that is a done deal yet, as the ethics implications of that have not yet been worked through at the Department of Justice, and it may be that Whitaker cannot take over that investigation. So at the moment, it stays with Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, and we do not know, by the way, his fate in the future, but it could turn over, if it clears ethics, to Matt Whitaker. The president talked about Whitaker some weeks ago. It sounded like Sessions was on his way out the door. A press release had actually been drafted saying that Whitaker was going to be the person to replace him, and that several people at the Justice Department were talking about the idea that Whitaker might replace him. But things cooled down for a while, but we knew, Shep, that Jeff Sessions was likely not going to be Attorney General, not going to head up the Department of Justice for long after the midterm elections. We did not know, though, that it was only going to be a matter of hours. Now, the president at that press conference this morning was asked about changes to his cabinet, was asked about Sessions. He said, I don't want to talk about that right now, but we'll talk about that in the future. And also saying that he's happy with most of his cabinet, but that there were other changes that were likely ahead. He was asked about Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke and the allegations against the secretary. The president said he's looking into all of that. He doesn't like how it sounds on the surface, but he's waiting to find out more details. So I believe, Shep, that this is just the first shoe to drop in what will be some significant changes in the president's cabinet. Mattis has also been talked about in terms of a possible departure. So hang on to your seats, because I think the ride is just beginning.
John Roberts, back to you in a moment. Reporting continues now on Fox television stations across the nation and on the Fox News channel on satellite and cable. Our national security correspondent, Catherine Herridge, live on the Hill. Catherine?
Well, thanks, Shep. In the last few minutes, we have obtained the resignation letter sent by Attorney General Jeff Sessions to the White House after the president requested his resignation this morning. And it reads in part, at your request, I am submitting my resignation. Since the day I was honored to be sworn in as Attorney General of the United States, I came to work at the Department of Justice every day determined to do my duty and serve my country. I have done so to the best of my ability, working to support the fundamental legal processes that are the foundation of justice. He goes on and continues, most importantly, in my time as Attorney General, we have restored and upheld the rule of law, a glorious tradition that each of us has a responsibility to safeguard. We have operated with integrity and have lawfully and aggressively advanced the policy agenda of this administration. I have been honored to serve as Attorney General and have worked to implement the law enforcement agenda based on the rule of law that formed a central part of your campaign for the presidency. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. President. My contacts had reported, Shep, prior to the midterms that if there was a significant increase in the number of Senate seats by Republicans, that we could look for a very swift transition at the head of the Justice Department after the midterms, on the basis that the president felt with greater control in the Senate, he would have greater likelihood of getting his candidate of choice through that process. Just adding on to what John Roberts was saying, this comes also at an important sort of inflection point, if you will. If you think back to around September, the president indicated that he was willing to immediately declassify some of these Russia records that House Republicans had been moving to make public. They had to do with the surveillance warrant for Trump campaign aide Carter Page. Then, as you know, the president did a very abrupt reversal, and we heard from him today at that news conference that this matter is now under consideration in a very aggressive way. And to recap, those records include 19 pages from a surveillance warrant. That warrant was signed by the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, as well as interviews with a senior Justice Department official who became a back channel for the dossier based on emails and other records during the 2016 campaign, as well as something called exculpatory evidence. Republicans say this is evidence that should have been provided to the court because it conflicted with the Russia collusion narrative. Final point, if I can, my contacts had said they did not anticipate, and this dovetails with the reporting from our Justice Department producer, any immediate movement with the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. They said there was a feeling that Mueller was coming to the close of his investigation on Russia collusion, and that Rosenstein would accept that report and sign off on the findings, and any removal of Rosenstein would be interpreted as an obstruction of justice on the Russia case, something that they wanted to avoid when they perceive that it may be very close to its conclusion, at least with the special counsel, Shep.
Catherine Herridge reporting. Stay with us. Reporting continues shortly and, in fact, is underway now. Our correspondents on Capitol Hill, multiple, are working sources there to get reaction from the leaders on there in Capitol Hill. We're also getting reporting in from the Justice Department. It's underway. When it's complete, we'll bring it to you shortly. Analysis now. Our senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano, is here for context and perspective. Big picture. What does this mean?
A couple of things. The resignation letter was prepared in such haste it's undated.
I heard you that, and I heard you say that, and I wondered, is it possible that this resignation letter has been sitting around since President Trump began saying, I want your resignation, quite a while back?
It is very possible that the president has had that's the reason it was undated. It's almost inconceivable that lawyers would sign something as dramatic as this without it being dated. The president may very well have said, I want your resignation letter. It's going to be in my top drawer, and I'll publish it when I'm ready, and you'll know. Wouldn't be beyond Donald Trump to use that as a style. Secondly, the FISA application, about which Catherine has spoken at length, that the president said he was going to reveal. He suddenly changed his mind 180 degrees after members of the intelligence community, American intelligence, British intelligence, Israeli intelligence, dissuaded him from doing so. This tells me that this is part of some larger picture. What larger picture? If this is perceived as a series of events fomented by President Trump in order to interfere with the Mueller investigation by putting another person in charge of it who may take it over, a person more friendly to Donald Trump than Bob Mueller is perceived as being. President Trump's own champion in the Republicans in the United States Senate, Senator Lindsey Graham, has said that would foment a constitutional crisis. So we have a lot of facts to get our arms around here, Shep. I don't know where this is going to go, but I do know it's volatile right now.
We heard Chuck Schumer say constitutional crisis. What did he mean? Help our viewers understand this.
That the president is using extraordinary powers to prevent the rule of law from taking its normal course, and that would foment a reaction on the part of the Congress. The Congress, a House soon to be controlled by the Democrats, the Senate soon to be controlled by more Republicans, but there are many of those Republicans who have indicated they would not roll over to an effort to interfere with Bob Mueller. Chief among them is the president's principal ally in the Senate, Senator Lindsey Graham, who used the exact same phrase 4 or 5 months ago that Senator Schumer used 4 or 5 minutes ago, the phrase you just quoted, constitutional crisis.
Would lawyers and judges call this offense suddenly after a midterm election defeat on the House?
Ask me again?
Would this be returning to offense?
Yes. This is the height of offense to do something like this within 24 hours of the conclusion of the midterms. I must also tell you that though Mr. Whitaker is now acting Attorney General Whitaker, is a former United States attorney for the Southern District of Iowa and was confirmed by the Senate for that. He was not confirmed by the Senate to become acting Attorney General. And the statute requires that the human being who runs the Department of Justice have been confirmed by the Senate for a senior leadership position. There's only 3 people there. Rod Rosenstein, who's next in line, Noel Francisco, who's the Solicitor General, the person that represents the government before the Supreme Court, and a third person whose name I'm not remembering, below Mr. Francisco. None of those is Matt Whitaker. So there may be an issue with whether or not he is legally qualified to serve as acting Attorney General.
Please stay. I'll have more questions in just a second. I need to get to reporting now. I first want to go back to Catherine Herridge very quickly. Catherine, it's not a secret that we've been hearing for quite some time that it's possible that this week and possibly even this day we might get something from Bob Mueller. The timing here might suggest, and I'm asking for your reporting on this, that maybe the White House has heard the same thing.
What I can say for my own reporting is that we entered what amounted to a blackout period prior to the midterms with the special counsel. So that's why so much of the reporting went quiet. Those are the standard U.S. Attorney guidelines that you're not supposed to announce an indictment or an investigation, open an investigation 60 days prior to an election. So we've been in this blackout period. I know from my reporting as well that once we pass the midterm milepost, that the floodgates may well open with another indictment. I'm not going to go into details because that would be speculation. And also movement with a former FBI deputy director, Andrew McCabe. His case has been in front of a grand jury here in Washington, D.C., over lying to federal investigators about his role in a media leak during the 2016 campaign. So basically, for a layperson, the brakes are off in terms of announcing pending prosecutions or investigations. So that's what I can say as fact and not speculation.
Catherine Herridge, thank you. Reporting now on the timeline. This is actual reporting from events that took place. August the 11th, President Trump called Jeff Sessions scared stiff and missing in action. August the 23rd, President Trump says Jeff Sessions never took control of the Justice Department. August 25th, President Trump said Jeff Sessions doesn't understand what's happening under his command position. September 3rd, President Trump blasted Jeff Sessions for charges against GOP congressmen. September the 4th, the Bob Woodward book, Fear, alleged that President Trump called Sessions a traitor for recusing himself. Same day, Fear alleged President Trump called Sessions a dumb Southerner. Judge Napolitano with analysis.
Well, look, as we know, the president has been on a vendetta using language that's typical for him and offensive to people not even involved with this in order to push back with Jeff Sessions. But it's clear that something happened. Either he has had this resignation undated, this undated resignation letter in his front drawer.
It sounds like that's possible because I have new reporting that's just come in. This new reporting just into Fox News Channel. John Kelly broke the news to Jeff Sessions, not the president. John Kelly made a phone call to Jeff Sessions just this morning and informed him of this. So that's new reporting just in.
Here's the dilemma about which you asked me a few minutes later, and I referenced Senator Schumer and Senator Graham. If the asked for resignation of Jeff Sessions was done for a bona fide governmental purpose because the president didn't like his leadership, or in his case, absence of leadership at the DOJ, then the request is lawful. But if the purpose of asking for the resignation or revealing a resignation already had was to interfere with the Bob Mueller investigation of him, of the president, you have a potential additional charge for Mueller to examine against the President of the United States called obstruction of justice.
More reporting on this. Catherine Herridge now. Catherine?
Well, just for some context, I think it's important to remind folks at home about the status of the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. There was a back and forth leading up to the midterms and the voting over whether he would appear before House Republicans and he would do an under oath transcribed interview. Those terms were never agreed upon, and the interview was going to focus on allegations that the Deputy Attorney General had discussed recording the president and invoking the 25th, and maybe other options to include the appointment of a special counsel or an obstruction of justice case as a way to push back against the Trump presidency in May of 2017. May of 2017 is kind of like the Ides of March in the Russia case, if you will, because that's the month when Director Comey was fired. There was this alleged discussion about recording President Trump, and then the immediate appointment of the special counsel, Robert Mueller. So when you look at the chain of command at the Justice Department, we have now the resignation of the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions. The deputy who is overseeing the Russia probe remains under pressure to return to the Hill and answer questions under oath about these allegations that he sought to record the president and invoke the 25th. Those on Rosenstein's page say that he was being sarcastic, but nonetheless, you see, this is another set of pressures that are coming to bear on the special counsel case.
Catherine Herridge reporting on the Hill. New reporting just in as this story develops. Whitaker to be sworn in today as acting Attorney General. John Roberts with reporting on that. John?
Yeah, and I've got a little other tangent to go off on here, Shep. Of course, the other big part with the Mueller investigation is not just who will run it. As far as we know, Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, continues to run it. But what does any of this mean for the potential of the president doing some sort of interview with the special counsel's office? We do know, and I confirmed just moments ago with sources familiar with the president's legal strategy, that his legal team has prepared a number of written answers to questions that Robert Mueller wanted answers to. However, no decision has yet been made as to whether or not to submit those answers to Mueller, and that this idea of getting rid of Sessions and moving Whitaker in or leaving it with Rosenstein, however that may play out, doesn't change anything at the moment, at least. But things are getting close. I'm told that the president's legal team has advised him to wait until after he gets back from the Paris trip, which he is going to be leaving on at the end of the week to mark the commemoration of the 100th anniversary of the end of the Great War, along with Emmanuel Macron, to wait until he gets back from that trip next week before the president makes any decision as to whether or not he will take those written answers that they already have and then submit them to Robert Mueller. So everything for the moment is status quo. The president's position on having an interview with Robert Mueller or submitting these written answers, because they really have ruled out the idea of a sit-down interview. Nothing changes as a result of Sessions' departure today, at the moment at least, Shep.
On Roberts continuing the phone calls and the contacts. New reporting now. Capitol Hill shocked by the Sessions news. That from our senior Capitol Hill producer, Chad Pergram, who's with us live. Chad.
Right, the sources I've reached out to fully expected this to come in some form because there's been so much conjecture about the future of Jeff Sessions for so long. But the fact that it finally happened, and especially happened just the day after all this news about the midterm elections, really has everybody back on their heels just a little bit. This morning, the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said he thought that the Senate would be focusing a lot on confirmations and nominations in the coming months. This could be the first of many. It may be very challenging to confirm a new Attorney General. They certainly will have more Republican seats. We don't know the total because we still have races out in Florida and Arizona. But Republicans will have additional numbers there, so it should be a little bit easier. But keep in mind that they're not going to move somebody through the Judiciary Committee probably during the lame duck session. We have Thanksgiving in a couple of weeks, then Christmas. This is probably going to be a project for the new Congress. And also look at how this is going to be framed by the Democrats when it comes to investigations. The House Minority Leader, prospectively the Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, just held a news conference and talked about how she wanted to work closely with the administration in a bipartisan fashion where possible. Of course, the president, fired this shot at Democrats earlier today. And Pelosi said, if they are going to investigate the president, it's going to be with purpose. It's going to be directed. It's not going to be, quote, scattershot freelancing. So you wonder if this does dip into the Mueller probe or possibly crossing a line of something the president may have done inappropriately, what the response might be from House Democrats as they now control the majority in the 116th 14th Congress next year, Shep.
What about that, Chad Pergram, thanks. New reporting, Chuck Schumer, the leader of the Democrats in the Senate, says, the headline, "We must protect Robert Mueller." And what about those new leaders in the House? Mike Emanuel with new reporting on that. Mike?
Well, Shep, Chuck Schumer is saying that he finds the timing of all this very suspect. He says any attorney general should not be able to interfere with the Robert Mueller Russia probe in any way. Schumer was talking about the election shakeout, the midterm election, and was asked about this breaking news, was handed to him. Here's his reaction from literally moments ago.
Protecting Mueller and his investigation is paramount. It would create a constitutional crisis if this were a prelude to ending or greatly limiting the Mueller investigation. And I hope President Trump and those he listens to will refrain from that.
Jeff Sessions, a well-known figure on Capitol Hill, was a United States Senator representing Alabama for 20 years, so a close colleague for a number of years with a lot of these lawmakers. Texas Republican Senator John Cornyn, a member of the Judiciary Committee, saying moments ago, quote, Attorney General Sessions has selflessly dedicated more than 40 years to serving the people of Alabama and the nation. As our country's top law enforcement official, he has been integral in fighting the opioid epidemic, keeping violent criminals off our streets, and supporting victims. Those who know him, his commitment to the rule of law, and his deep and abiding concern for our country. So bottom line, a lot of shock on Capitol Hill because this is somebody they served with for a long time, although they did expect that there would be a shakeup coming. And now the focus, of course, will be on confirming a new attorney general with all these things going on in the world.
Mike Emanuel, thanks. Continuing that reporting, Catherine Herridge in Washington now. Catherine?
It's one of these situations where you're getting a lot of information from different open source media, and an interview with Whitaker has been flagged to Fox News. This was an interview with CNN in July of 2017, and according to this report, it was prior to his position as the chief of staff. But significantly, what's flagged in the reporting is that Whitaker discussed a way to sort of defang the special counsel by cutting off its budget. And it says, quote, so I could see a scenario where Jeff Sessions is replaced with a recess appointment, Whitaker said, and that the attorney general doesn't fire Bob Mueller, but he just reduces his budget to so low that his investigation grinds to almost a halt. These were comments to CNN, July of 2017. This was, according to this report, prior to Whitaker becoming the chief of staff. But in this interview, he's musing about ways to defang the special counsel Robert Mueller probe into Russia collusion, and doing that not by removing DOJ senior leadership, but by using the purse strings, reducing or cutting off the budget. I know through my own reporting, and we touched on this earlier, that Whitaker has really been a quiet advocate for the declassification of the Russia records, and Republicans, certainly in the House, feel very strongly that those records indicate that when the Justice Department and FBI sought and secured a surveillance warrant for Trump campaign aide in the fall of 2016, and think about it, this is a surveillance warrant on a political operative, that the intelligence had not been verified, and there were sort of two buckets of information, one that also had exculpatory evidence, so that conflicted with the Russian narrative, and they maintain that was not provided to the surveillance court. So if that is Whitaker's position, you can see clearly where he falls in the context of the Mueller probe, Shep.
Catherine Herridge, new reporting now, Mitch McConnell's statement. Let's get to Chad Pergram on the Hill. Chad?
Right. I'm going to read this statement to you that just came in from the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell. He says, I thank Jeff Sessions for his dedicated service as Attorney General. Throughout his career as a prosecutor, a senator, and as Attorney General, he remained steadfast in his commitment to the rule of law in our great nation. I wish him well, and I look forward to working with him in his future endeavors. And this is something that Mike Emanuel touched on just a moment ago. Jeff Sessions was a creature of the United States Senate. He was first elected here in 1996. A lot of people here on Capitol Hill, especially Republican senators and those who served with him in the Senate, think he got a raw deal. Why he left a very, safe Senate seat from Alabama for this job. The president gave him the business a lot of times, and now he's out the door.
Chad Pergram, thanks. There is breaking news now on Fox News Channel and Fox News television stations across America already. The swearing in has happened. Catherine Herridge on the Hill. Catherine.
Well, we're getting a little bit more fidelity on the details here. Our Justice Department sources are reporting that because Matt Whitaker had been sworn in for another Justice Department position, there wasn't the necessity or the formality to do a second swearing in, and he's now considered the acting Attorney General Shep. So I think if you step back, and for folks just joining us at home, you need to see that we've really had a series of events that I would argue were very, very organized and very deliberate, and even some would say choreographed, from the request from the White House Chief of Staff John Kelly to the Attorney General Jeff Sessions this morning that the president was requesting his resignation. This is absolutely within the president's authority. He can hire and fire whomever he chooses. And then what appears to be the hastily drafted letter by the Attorney General submitting his resignation, also highlighting accomplishments of the department under his tenure: transnational crime, gangs. What he said was strong and aggressive immigration enforcement. He said these were the central tenets of the Trump presidency. But again, it's important to look at kind of the tick-tock of events, how quickly it happened, and how deliberate and organized this was. So this appears to me, at least, to be a decision that was taken well before this morning, Shep.
Catherine Herridge, thanks. More reporting in a moment. Hiring and firing, Catherine Herridge says. Judge Napolitano.
The president can fire an attorney general for almost any reason, but not for an improper purpose. He cannot fire him if the purpose of the firing is to shake up the leadership of the Justice Department in order to interfere with a criminal investigation that the president wants to interfere with. Now, the person who is now running the Justice Department told CNN, as Catherine just quoted, in July of this summer, the best way to take care of Mueller is to dry up his funds. If that is the reason for which Mr. Whitaker is now the acting Attorney General of the United States, Mr. Whitaker himself could be in the crosshairs of Bob Mueller.
Bigger picture, is protecting Bob Mueller something that the Democrats can get done right away? Or is this avalanche coming down the mountain so quickly and by design, possibly?
I don't know that it can be done right away without any Republican support. Our colleague Chris Starwalt argues that there are numerous Republicans in the Senate who will not roll over and accept this. Jeff Flake is still in the Senate. Senator Sass is there. Lindsey Graham himself, the president's champion now on the floor of the Senate, said an effort to interfere with Bob Mueller would provoke a constitutional crisis. So I don't know how it goes politically, but legally, I agree with Catherine Herridge. It is beginning to appear as if this was an orchestrated effort to shake up the Justice Department with such ferocity that the shaking up reaches Bob Mueller.
New reporting now just in from the Attorney General Eric Holder, a former, quoting now, anyone who attempts to interfere with or obstruct the Mueller inquiry must be held accountable. This is a red line. We are a nation of laws and norms, not subject to the self-interested actions of one man. Chad Pergram with more reporting on this. Chad?
Well, I've talked to some Republican sources here who've told me for a long time that they did not think that President Trump would try to fire the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. But the question is getting rid of Jeff Sessions sort of a stand-in for that? That's the problem. And also, I want to read to you, we just got a tweet here from Jerry Nadler. He's going to be the top Democrat, the chairman, prospectively, on the House Judiciary Committee when Democrats take the reins in the new Congress here. We've been hearing a lot of rattling in just the past, 20 hours or so about what Democrats might do when it comes to investigations. And Nadler says, quote, Americans must have answers immediately as to the reasoning behind the president removing Jeff Sessions. Why is the president making this change? And who has authority over the special counsel investigation? We will be holding people accountable. So here we are just hours after it's clear that Democrats will control the House of Representatives. You already have Democrats, with cause in this case, ramping up their heat on President Trump over this firing of Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Shep.
Chad Pergram, as our reporting continues, excuse me, Judge Napolitano, your thoughts?
I'll say it again, if the firing of Jeff Sessions was...
How do you prove one way or another?
You infer from the words that people use, from the timing they engaged in, and from the behavior that surrounds it. But if the firing was done because the president was disenchanted with his leadership, it is licit.
Who decides that?
Whoever challenges this, and it could very well be challenged in the political forum, which would mean Republicans and Democrats in the United States Senate. But if the firing was done in order to put somebody in charge of the DOJ who is adverse to the existence of the Mueller investigation and wants to dry it up by shrinking its budget, that would be an improper purpose, as articulated in the tweet you just quoted from former Attorney General Eric Holder. And that itself could be considered obstruction of justice and should be investigated.
The timing on the heels of the loss of the investigative arm of the House.
Again, it's going to depend. When did Jeff Sessions sign that now mysteriously undated letter? Did he sign it back in August when the president began his rampage against him? And has it been sitting in the president's desk or John Kelly's desk that long? Or did he sign it this morning and they just forgot to put a date on it? It would depend upon the machinations and the preparation that occurred in order to bring about the abrupt and pronounced change in leadership of the DOJ that happened in the past 2 hours.
Politico reiterates, and this just in, acting Attorney General Matt Whitaker, excuse me, will take over supervising Robert Mueller's Russia investigation from Rod Rosenstein, the embattled Deputy Attorney General. That's what's getting out into the ether now.
This is being done by a person who said, let's dry him up by shrinking his budget. Beginning to look more and more to me, Shep, nefarious.
News just in and brand new reporting. Chuck Schumer of New York, the leader, is now saying that Whitaker should recuse himself.
I'm going to guess that the reason Chuck Schumer said that is because of the statement that Mr. Whitaker made to CNN, which Catherine quoted and about which you and I have been talking in the past couple of minutes. If he is of the view that Bob Mueller's investigation ought not to exist, he cannot interfere with it. Even if he is the acting attorney general, he cannot interfere with it because the legal machinery has begun to roll, and it can't be stopped at this point without there being the appearance of some improper purpose for stopping it.
Judge Napolitano, thanks to Brett Baer, now host of Special Report and chief political anchor out of Washington. Brett, your thoughts?
Well, this is a big moment. You heard the president being asked about it. He kind of deferred, saying that there may be changes on the way. But no one's surprised that Sessions is one of the first. I think what they're surprised at is what you're talking about, that the acting attorney general is Matt Whitaker, the chief of staff, and that if true, he's overseeing the Mueller probe. I don't know that we have that definitively. I know it's out there and about in different forms, but that is the significant moment. And you already have Jerry Nadler on the Democratic side, who will take a chairmanship, saying that they need answers right now as to the choice of Matt Whitaker and what is happening with Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein, and where is his role here? I think as this unfolds, Shep, we're going to get more information from the Justice Department, but the Whitaker appointment is really what's roiling Capitol Hill right now.
New reporting right now, Senator Schumer's statement is out. Chad Pergram has that on the Hill. Chad.
Right. Well, that's that issue about that recusal question and just how far is Chuck Schumer willing to push. You know, here's another issue. One of the reasons why Republicans lost control of the House of Representatives, certainly there were questions about votes on tax reform, health care, and also it just being a bad map for Republicans because of the retirements, but also because in certain quarters, these districts which were carried by Hillary Clinton, they didn't view their Republican member as pushing back sufficiently against President Trump and his administration and being a check here on Capitol Hill against his administration. It's these sort of perceived abuses is what roiled Republican voters, swing voters, women voters in these suburban districts, and one of the reasons that the House flipped. This is something that Democrats said, we're going to be a check, we're going to work on this, and here they're going to have this opportunity right out of the block. But that issue of the recusal is going to loom large. We just don't know enough right now in the early going. And don't forget, as I said a few minutes ago on the air, Shep, that a lot of these Republican senators and Democratic senators, for that matter, who served with Jeff Sessions felt that he got a raw deal. And they are going to work to protect Jeff Sessions. They're also going to work to protect Bob Mueller. Remember, there's some bipartisan pieces of legislation out there which the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has refused to call up. Tom Tillis has a bill from North Carolina. Cory Booker, Democratic senator from New Jersey, has a bill. Those pieces of legislation haven't come up. But one wonders if that conversation might start to get a little more ripe here, even in the lame duck session in the next couple of weeks, as an effort to protect Robert Mueller as they investigate deeper what happened with Jeff Sessions and how this may pertain to Rod Rosenstein and the Russia probe.
Chad, thanks. New reporting, the Schumer statement as follows. Given his previous comments advocating defunding and imposing limitations on the Mueller investigation, Mr. Whitaker should recuse himself from its oversight for the duration of his time as acting attorney general. More new reporting. I've just been informed that the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, is on his way to the White House. We are informed that he's on his way to the White House for a previously scheduled meeting. Brett Baer for context from Washington. Brett, the timing last night, he lost the House of Representatives, the investigative arm in the House. This morning, he holds what could be described as nothing less than, at least, an extraordinary news conference from the East Room of the White House, no less. Then moments later, these shoes begin to fall.
Yes, and we don't know exactly, Shep, how that all came out, how long, to the judge's point, that letter has kind of been ready to deploy. Did he feel like the news conference didn't get the focus or wasn't the focus that he wanted to have? And then this is a development that obviously takes a lot of oxygen in the room. I think the real question politically now is, as Democrats take control of the House, that obviously doesn't happen until January in their oversight capacity, do Republicans step up and say and protect the oversight of the Mueller investigation? Like, what is the extent to which Republicans, either on the Senate side or on the House side, come out with statements saying that either one, Whitaker, like Schumer says, should recuse himself, or two, there needs to be some protection that the administration is not going to just stop the Mueller probe?
Judge?
To follow up on Brett, look, the Mueller investigation is of the President of the United States. If the President of the United States intentionally puts someone in charge of the Justice Department who is adverse to the existence of the Mueller investigation and plans to do away with it or shrink it out of existence, dry it up by denying it the funds it needs to operate, it begins to look more and more apparent as though the timing and the mechanism here was intended to influence the investigation. If the purpose of the influence was to stop Mueller from knocking on whatever door he's knocking on, it could very well be obstruction of justice, which generates another investigation.
Are we expecting, Brett, something else to happen today, tomorrow, sometime this week, or very soon as it relates to the Mueller investigation?
You know, we don't know a timeline. When you talk to people in the know, and obviously we all know that the Mueller folks have been pretty tight on releasing information, but there has been activity and a lot of focus on Roger Stone. There have been interviews. We've heard of grand jury testimony. But it didn't sound like it was imminent. But for the Mueller probe, we really don't know until it happens. I do know on Capitol Hill, they expected after the midterm that some action was likely going to start to happen one way or another. And the question then becomes, if there is not another indictment, if there aren't more indictments, that process goes through the oversight at the DOJ. And as the acting attorney general, Whitaker could potentially sit on that and not even forward it over to Congress if he wanted to.
A little more context. It was the year 2016 that Whitaker wrote an opposing view editorial in USA Today newspaper, which was titled, and I quote, "I would indict Hillary Clinton, opposing view," and then it goes on to cite statutes and otherwise. Catherine Herridge now with some context on why other reasons Whitaker might be suitable for the president.
Right, well, this is certainly not a household name for most folks, Shep. My understanding from a contact who is familiar with Whitaker and close to the White House is that he's well liked by the president, but perhaps one of his strongest character traits is that he's seen by the president and others sort of as an outsider, someone who has not come up through the system, FBI or DOJ, with Robert Mueller, who was FBI director for 12 years, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein or Christopher Wray. He is not part of that generation, did not come up through the ranks with them, and is seen as somewhat more objective and an outsider. And a point we discussed earlier is that he has behind the scenes been very much a quiet advocate for the declassification of these Russia records. And the reason I keep saying that is that what we heard from the president today, number one, was about the first time he talked about these Russia records, and then number two, he indicated that he was going to move as quickly as possible to make them public.
Catherine, thanks. New reporting and context on Whitaker. Some more of his musings from the past. Trace Gallagher with that. Trace?
And kind of piggybacking on what Catherine Harris was talking about and you and the judge were talking about, Shep, there were reports going back to September saying that White House Chief of Staff John Kelly called Matthew Whitaker, Jeff Sessions' Chief of Staff, saying that if Sessions left, Whitaker would step up as acting Attorney General. Remember, that's when Rod Rosenstein's tenure was in limbo because of the report that he wore a wire around President Trump. So keep that in mind. We know that Whitaker played football at Iowa, University of Iowa. He was a treasurer. He ran for treasurer but lost. In 2014, he also ran unsuccessfully for the Republican nomination for an Iowa U.S. Senate seat. And as for the conversation you're having now with the judge, it's interesting that before he joined Jeff Sessions at the State Department, Whitaker was very critical of Democrats involved with Ukrainian sources during the election. In fact, he wrote an op-ed for The Hill demanding more scrutiny of a meeting between Democratic officials and Ukrainian officials. He also played down the now infamous Trump Tower meeting involving Donald Trump Jr. and a Kremlin lawyer who promised to have dirt on Hillary Clinton. And as for what you were just talking about, Shep, the op-ed was written in USA Today in 2016. It was an opposing op-ed to James Comey, then FBI director, saying that he would, in fact, or the recent FBI director saying that he would not indict Hillary Clinton. And Whitaker wrote the opposing, and it said, partly quoting here, a reasonable prosecutor may ask if on numerous occasions an unknown State Department employee had taken top secret information from a secured system, emailed that information on a Gmail account, and stored the information on a personal server for years. Would that individual be prosecuted? And he concluded saying, I believe they would. That's the op-ed, 2016 USA Today. Shep.
Trace Gallagher with the context. Thanks. New reporting now. Mark Warner, the United States Senator, Democrat of Virginia, the Vice Chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, quoting, "No one is above the law, and any effort to interfere with the special counsel's investigation would be a gross abuse of power by the president. While the president may have the authority to replace the attorney general, this must not be the first step in an attempt to impede, obstruct, or end the Mueller investigation." Senators from both parties have repeatedly affirmed their support for the special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. Every one of them should speak out now and deliver a clear message to the president that the special counsel's investigation must continue without interference. Brett Baer in Washington. Brett?
Yeah, on background from DOJ officials, the acting attorney general is in charge of all matters under the purview of the Department of Justice, meaning acting attorney general Matt Whitaker will oversee the Russia probe by special counsel Mueller. I think we shouldn't go to the conclusion just because of what he has written in the past that definitively he's about bringing it down, but it's important to put in context. The fact that the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein is making his way to the White House for a meeting is also interesting. They say it was pre-scheduled, but on a day like this, you wonder about that. He recently, remember, there were rumors that he was going to be fired, and then the president kind of cozied up to him and had a couple of meetings and said, you know, Rod's a good guy. Obviously, still had many questions about his oversight after Jeff Sessions recused himself. The acting attorney general never recused himself. So now, as acting attorney general, he oversees the Mueller probe. And the president has said publicly, Shep, that he is allowed, he said, the Mueller probe to go forward and wants to play it out. But he has also said he could end it at any time.
New statement in, Brett, from Richard Blumenthal, the Democrat of Connecticut, quoting now, "This is a break the glass moment. Replacing the attorney general with a non-Senate confirmed political staffer is highly irregular and unacceptable. Protecting the special counsel investigation is more urgent than ever. He goes on, my Republican colleagues must rise to the challenge and show political backbone by demanding that Mr. Whitaker recuse himself from oversight of the special counsel's investigation. New paragraph. I will be introducing legislation to ensure that Congress and the American people see the results of special counsel Mueller's work. I implore my colleagues of both parties to unite behind efforts to ensure that the special counsel can continue this work without interference. Any attempt to limit his resources or the scope of his investigation is unacceptable. The world and history are watching. Judge Napolitano.
Okay, so you recuse yourself if you have an interest in the outcome. You recuse yourself if you're not a believer in the thoroughness or the fairness or the lawfulness of the prosecution. I suggest to you that he's in both of those categories. He's already said publicly, I would shrink Mueller out of existence by stopping the pipeline of cash. Mueller spends a lot of money. He has many FBI agents and prosecutors and clerks and staff that work for him. You cut off that spigot of money, you're interfering with the prosecution. That's what Whitaker said he would do. That's the basis for the recusal. The other reason for the recusal is he hasn't been confirmed by the Senate, which Senator Blumenthal, a lawyer, has just pointed out in the statement you read.
New reporting, Rod Rosenstein on his way to the White House. John Roberts on the North Lawn. John?
And we do know that the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein is on his way over to the White House for a previously scheduled meeting. He comes here a number of times during the week, Shep. So in the past, it has been read into that something may be up in terms of Rosenstein, when in fact it was just a meeting on something in particular. But there was a time not too long ago when Rosenstein came here to the White House and had told colleagues on his way out the door from the Department of Justice that he expected to be fired. He had a meeting with the Chief of Staff, John Kelly, when he arrived at the White House, at which we're told Kelly told him that he was not going to be fired. And for all we know right now, Shep, and again, the reporting is still early on all of this, but the White House is making no moves to try to have any kind of an impact on the Mueller investigation. The president said during the press conference earlier today that he could shut it down if he wanted to, but that he doesn't really want to. In fact, they really want to get it over with. And making any kind of change to the leadership of the Mueller investigation may actually just slow things down. And so the president may leave Rosenstein in charge, although Whitaker could be actually overseeing the entire investigation. So we're still trying to sort some of this out. The other thing that's out there, Shep, is the president's potential interview with Robert Mueller. No decision has been made on whether or not the president's attorneys and the president will submit the series of written answers to the Mueller questions to the special counsel's office. We likely won't have a decision on that until after the president gets back from the World War I commemoration in Paris this weekend.
John Roberts reporting at the White House. A live look now at the Department of Justice. We're waiting for the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, the now departing Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, to depart for the day, leaving the Department of Justice. The speed of events is noteworthy. That extraordinary news conference from the East Room, where the president clearly made the turn from fighting with the Democrats, which he had been doing. Now they're taking over the House of Representatives. Shift the focus now to the media, in even for the president. A testy news conference, and the likes of which the East Room has never hosted, never in history. Since then, the immediate forced resignation of the Attorney General, the immediate announcement of a replacement, an interim replacement, the almost immediate swearing in of that replacement, now the departure here, the arrival of Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. To John Bussey now, associate editor at the Wall Street Journal. The Journal and the Fox News Channel share common parentage. This is like a roller coaster.
It's moving. And we're about to see what happens to the Mueller investigation by seeing what happens to Rod Rosenstein. So part of this is animus between the president and Sessions. This has been a dead man walking, a dead cabinet member walking now for over a year. The president has not wanted him in that job since he recused himself. But from the public standpoint, the issue here is not kind of the play-by-play of the relationship between these two men. It's what happens to the Mueller investigation. This has been about as much of a foretold story as there can be out there for anybody in Washington. We knew that this was eventually coming, probably after the midterms. So what has Mueller been doing to prepare for this? Does he have indictments already underway? Does he have a report already prepared to submit? Are there additional ways in which he can kind of project his findings regardless of who is running the Department of Justice? We'll see over the next couple of days. They're going to have to confirm a new attorney general. That's going to take time. That gives Mueller even a sort of a broader spectrum within which to act if he needs to precipitously.
Since the last hour, it is not lost on anyone that for 2 months the Rod Rosenstein investigation, the Bob Mueller investigation, I should say, has been quiet, because there is sort of a standing principle that you don't talk about such things in the middle of national elections. That it has been quiet does not mean it has not been active. In fact, we're led to believe that it's been anything but inactive. And along the way, Bob Mueller wanting to move this along as much as anyone else. And I must tell you candidly, because this is true for every journalist who covers this stuff, we've all been told over and over again to expect something this week. We've been led to believe, though, I don't know how, led to believe that we could get something, and could is the operative word, as early as today. It's not like the White House wouldn't hear this, and you wonder if the two trains are coming down the track ready for a collision course, the likes of which we haven't seen in recent modern history.
The decisions that the person running the Department of Justice has to make, whether it's the Attorney General, the Acting Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General, are so delicate, so touch so profoundly the system of justice in the United States that the statute exists to prevent a political hack from having that position, and requires the scrutiny of the Senate Judiciary Committee, the ethics people, and the vote of the Senate before a person can have that job. I do not believe Mr. Whitaker has been through that procedure.
Extraordinary split screen that if you're watching, if you're listening on Sirius XM or somewhere else, what our viewers are seeing is on the left-hand side of the screen is the Department of Justice, where we're expecting the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, who just resigned, to walk out, and for the last time. And on the right-hand side of the screen is outside the White House, where we're expecting Rod Rosenstein, the Acting Attorney General, who is overseeing the Mueller investigation, to come into the White House for what has been billed as, and I quote, a previously scheduled meeting. There is no timing in a vacuum. These two events to take place possibly simultaneously. And I must say, at the same time, an extraordinary event happening on Wall Street. The Dow's up more than 500 points, more than 2% on the day. Whatever happened last night, it didn't bother anybody on Wall Street. That's clear. I just wonder what the next steps are going to be, and how leaders on Capitol Hill, John Bussey, are going to react, because there is a clear effort to get ahead of things here.
Lindsey Graham, who was very much against doing anything that got in the way of the Mueller investigation, has already said, hey, I'm looking forward to the process by which we will find a new Attorney General. That's not saying he's going to rush the issue. It's very interesting. The president has made an argument that this investigation has dragged on too long. Something needs to be done. Somebody needs to kind of call it to an end. It's a hoax in the president's mind. That's
in the president's words.
In his words, that's just inaccurate from the standpoint of these types of investigations over previous presidencies. It takes time to do these, and if anything, this has been a pretty efficient investigation.
With a nod to history, it has been.
Yeah, the Whitewater investigation, which went on for years, Mueller has already gotten guilty pleas, he's gotten indictments. We don't know what, during this silent period, which has frankly extended the entire period Mueller has been undertaking this investigation. There have not been leaks from his office. We don't know how much further down the road he's already gone. Maybe he's found that there's really nothing else to pursue. Maybe he's pursuing quite vigorously members of the family, the president. We just don't know.
If Judge Napolitano, if you look across the landscape there at the White House, you look at individual people who reside there, who work there, maybe who are family members, maybe who are closer advisors, who right now is of the belief, I'm next?
Well, I mean, from sources that have been in touch with all of us, we believe that the investigation is not limited to the President of the United States, that it also goes to his son, Donald Jr., because of the Trump Tower meeting with the Russians, and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner.
Eric Tucker is a reporter for the Justice Department for the Associated Press and has been all over this story for as many months as I can count back. Eric, your thoughts on where we are now and what it may mean?
So it's really significant, obviously, Shep, that this is happening right after the midterm election. The president had sort of floated the idea that this could happen, and now we're seeing it. And what's really interesting is we're at a very sensitive stage of the investigation, of course, where there are a lot of unanswered questions. There are critical, pivotal moments ahead, up to and including whether the president is going to sit for an interview with Mueller. And so now there are new questions about who's going to be overseeing the investigation in place of Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein.
And it sounds like the person who's going to be overseeing this investigation is Matthew Whitaker.
Exactly, Shep. And one thing that's really interesting to note about Mr. Whitaker is that sort of in his prior role as somebody who was a television commentator, he was fairly critical, or at least skeptical, about the powers and scope of the Mueller investigation. He had sort of suggested publicly that Trump was within his rights to be a little bit unhappy if the investigation stretched into his finances. So we'll see sort of what happens in terms of the oversight going forward. But Mr. Whitaker has definitely sort of signaled a degree of skepticism, at least before entering the Justice Department. And
Democrats on Capitol Hill have signaled that they don't believe that he's right and proper at this moment.
That's right. We already have a call from Chuck Schumer, who's the top Senate Democrat, that Whitaker should recuse himself. There's not necessarily a ground that's been publicly explained as to why that should happen, but I anticipate more of that going forward for sure.
Who's concerned most at this moment in the building behind you, if anyone?
That's a good question. I sort of don't know what happens next, and I'm not sure that really anybody at the White House or the Justice Department really understands sort of the next big step. When you think of the way the Justice Department is structured, the Deputy Attorney General is really the person who handles day-to-day affairs and is a critical decision maker. Rod Rosenstein has not departed that building, so I imagine in a lot of ways that authority will not go away immediately.
Well, Adam Schiff is a man who will be heading up investigations, if you will, on the Democratic side when they take over in the House of Representatives. He has just issued this statement, new reporting. President Trump just removed Jeff Sessions. He wants an attorney general to serve his interests, not the public. Mueller's investigation and the independence of the Department of Justice must be protected. Whitaker and any nominee must commit to doing both. We will protect the rule of law. New reporting, Chad Pergram on the Hill. Chad?
Yeah, I think we now know what the lame duck session is going to be about and the early days of the 116th Congress as Democrats take control. We thought it might be a little bit about trying to keep the government open and the border wall. It's probably now going to be about the issue with Robert Mueller and whether or not they should move legislation to protect him. The pressure will be enormous from both Democrats and some Republicans on House Speaker Paul Ryan, certainly on Senate Majority Mitch McConnell, certainly on Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who has not yet moved legislation to that effect. And if they don't, House Democrats, you can bet your bottom dollar, will try to move that when they get the reins of power in the new Congress. Keep in mind right now that you also will have leadership elections that are going to take place on both sides of the aisle. It's going to be interesting on the Democratic side. We have a statement from the House Minority Whip Steny Hoyer, who's running for Majority Leader now, to see who comes out the strongest and says, yes, we will put their feet to the fire. And, you have a lot of moderate Democrats who won in swing districts in the House of Representatives. You have a lot of very liberal members who won, the Ocasio-Cortezes who won in New York. They really want to put the screws to the Trump administration, but just how far are the Democrats willing to go next year?
Chad Pergram with new reporting on the Hill. Chad, thanks. Before we wrap up the hour, Brett Baer in Washington, final thoughts?
Just some perspective here. Nobody is surprised by the fact that Jeff Sessions is fired, saying, I submit my resignation at your request. He received essentially the Rex Tillerson treatment with a tweet from the president announcing his replacement. The surprise and the questions are coming about Matt Whitaker and the motivation of his oversight of the Russia probe. Traditionally, Shep, this day is a news day. If you remember, Don Rumsfeld, Defense Secretary, was fired the day after the midterms, 2006, in the heart of the Iraq War. A lot of stuff happens on the Wednesday after Election Day, and this will be a big news story for days to come.
Yep, exponentially so on this day. Brett Baer, my man, I'll see you tonight, 6 Eastern, 5 Central on Special Report, America's Evening News. Judge Napolitano, this isn't the only thing over which Whitaker will have...
Our White House Fox colleague, John Decker, who was a lawyer, writes to remind us that most, if not all, of the investigation into the finances, the personal finances of President Trump and the finances of the Trump Organization has been handed by Mueller to the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York. Who is his new boss? Mr. Whitaker.
Judge Napolitano, thank you. Thank you to the reporting of Trace Gallagher, John Roberts, Mike Emanuel, Catherine Herridge, Judge Napolitano, John Bussey of the Journal, Brett Baer in Washington. What a day. It's also a huge day on Wall Street. The Dow has taken an enormous climb, up 551 points. The outcome of the midterm elections was good for the stock market in general, mostly because it didn't produce any big surprises, but it was especially good for the healthcare industry and several other companies. This from Associated Press. Health insurers rose sharply today as investors anticipated that any prospects of repealing the Affordable Health Act or Obamacare, which expanded health insurance to millions of Americans, diminished greatly now that Democrats control the House of Representatives. Marijuana companies soared today after several states, including Michigan, voted to legalize pot. Oil and gas companies benefited from the defeat of a ballot measure in Colorado that might have restricted drilling, and a dialysis service company rocketed after